Picture this. A man in a dimly lit apartment, 3 a.m., scrolling through her Instagram for the 47th time tonight. The blue light carves shadows into his face like a digital sculptor of despair. He's memorized every photo, every caption, even the timestamps of when she posts. Tuesday mornings at 8:47, Friday nights at 11:23. He tells himself he's gathering intelligence, like some lovesick Machiavelli plotting his next move. But here's the grotesque truth. He's become a moth circling a flame that was never lit for him. The ancient Greeks had a word for this: aporia, the state of puzzlement that paralyzes. But they were too polite. What we're discussing is something far more visceral. It's the taste of copper pennies in your mouth when she mentions another man's name. It's the weight of your phone in your pocket, heavier than any stone Sisyphus ever pushed, because it contains the possibility of her message, a message that never comes. Listen closely, and I'll tell you something the dating coaches won't. The first kiss that destroys a man isn't on her lips. It's the kiss he plants on the idea of her. That phantom taste, sweeter than wine and more bitter than wormwood, becomes his daily bread. He feeds on it morning, noon, and night, growing simultaneously fat with fantasy and skeletal with reality. There's a story from the mountains of Romania. Perhaps you've heard it whispered in the spaces between heartbeats. A shepherd fell in love with a iele, a forest spirit who danced naked in the moonlight. Every night, he would follow her deeper into the woods, and every night, she would vanish just as his fingers grazed her shadow. One morning, the villagers found him frozen to death, his lips blue as forget-me-nots, still puckered for a kiss that never came. The locals say, if you listen carefully on winter nights, you can still hear him whispering her name to the wind. But you're not listening to fairy tales, are you? You're here because you recognize yourself in that shepherd. You've tasted that particular flavor of madness, the one that comes from chasing echoes. Modern psychology, those merchants of obvious truths, published a study in 2024 about limerent obsession, as if giving it a clinical name could cure it. They found that men who fixate on unavailable women show the same neural patterns as cocaine addicts, the same dopamine loops, the same withdrawal symptoms, the same inevitable relapse. Here's what Kierkegaard knew but never quite said outright. The sickness unto death isn't despair, it's hope. Hope is the kiss that keeps you climbing that mountain, pushing that boulder, refreshing that inbox. Hope is the silk rope around your neck that feels like a lover's scarf until you realize you're hanging from it. Let me ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, even if only to the darkness of your room. When was the last time you pursued something that pursued you back? Not chased, not strategized, not performed your little dance of availability and mystery. When did you last feel wanted without wondering why? The silence of your answer is the sound of that boulder rolling back down the mountain. The liberation comes not from finally reaching the summit. There is no summit. It comes from recognizing the mountain itself is an illusion, a hologram projected by your own desperate need to climb something, anything, to feel like you're moving toward meaning. The moment you stop climbing, the mountain dissolves like sugar in rain, and you're left standing on solid ground, perhaps for the first time in years. But solid ground feels strange under feet accustomed to climbing, doesn't it? That's why most men return to their mountains, their boulders, their blue-lit vigils. It's easier to be Sisyphus than to be free. At least Sisyphus had a purpose, even if it was pointless. The words you swallow for her that become the stones that build your tomb. There's a place in Venice, Not the tourist Venice with its grotesque gondoliers singing off-key love songs for tips, but the real Venice, the one that exists at 4 a.m. when the fog rolls in like a drunk widow returning home. In the Castello district, there's a stone carved with a mouth. La Bocca di Leone, they called it. The lion's mouth. Citizens would slip anonymous denunciations through those stone lips, accusations that could destroy lives with a whisper. But here's what the history books don't tell you. The real torture wasn't being denounced. It was being the one holding the accusation in your hand, feeling its weight, knowing you could speak truth but choosing silence instead. That same stone mouth exists in every man's throat when she asks, "What are you thinking?" And you swallow the truth like broken glass. "Nothing," you say, while your mind screams a symphony of doubts, desires, and desperate observations. You've noticed how she lights up when his name appears on her phone. You've counted the seconds between her smiles. Longer now, like winter shadows. You've felt the distance growing between your bodies in bed, measurable in millimeters that might as well be miles. But you swallow it all, every splinter of truth, because somewhere you learned that love means never making her uncomfortable with your reality. Schopenhauer wrote that we forfeit 3/4 of ourselves to be like other people. But he was an optimist. When it comes to love, we forfeit everything, leaving only a mannequin that nods and smiles and says, "Whatever you want, dear," while the real self suffocates in the basement of our being. I once knew a man, let's call him Marcus, though that wasn't his name, who spent 7 years perfecting the art of agreeable silence. His girlfriend would rage about her coworkers, her family, the weather, the universe's personal vendetta against her happiness. And Marcus? He became a master ventriloquist, his dummy mouth saying, "You're right," while his real voice grew rusty from disuse. One December evening, after she'd spent 3 hours dissecting why her sister's engagement ring was basically an insult, something cracked in Marcus. Not dramatically. Cracks rarely announce themselves with fanfare. He simply looked at her and said, "You exhaust me." The silence that followed wasn't the comfortable silence of companionship. It was the silence of a bomb that's already exploded, but hasn't reached your ears yet. She left him that night, taking with her 7 years of his swallowed words, undigested truths that had turned cancerous in his belly. But here's the twist that would make Machiavelli himself slow clap from his grave. Marcus didn't feel loss. He felt lighter, as if he'd been carrying another person on his shoulders for 7 years and had finally remembered he had legs of his own. A 2025 study from the University of Copenhagen, those melancholy Danes know something about swallowed sorrows, found that men in relationships suppress authentic expression 73% more than single men. They called it performative harmony. I call it dying by 1,000 agreeable nods. The throat is where truth goes to die, but it's also where the voice is born. Every word you swallow for her comfort becomes a stone in your throat, and eventually you're speaking through a graveyard. Your voice becomes a ghost of itself, saying words that belong to no one, expressing feelings that have been focus grouped for her approval. Tell me, what would happen if you spoke the next true thought that crossed your mind? Not the cruel thought, not the petty complaint, but the true thought. The one that flutters against your teeth like a moth desperate for light. The ancient Sufis had a saying, "The breast which holds secrets becomes a grave." But they were only half right. It becomes a grave where you're buried alive, conscious but unable to scream because you've trained your throat to only whisper sweet nothings. The kiss on the throat isn't romantic. It's a silencing. Every time you bite your tongue instead of speaking truth, you're kissing goodbye to another piece of your authentic self. and she doesn't even know she's presiding over your funeral because you've dressed it up as a dinner date. She kisses your brow and erases your name from your own story. In medieval times, they had a torture device called the head crusher. Ingenious in its simplicity, a metal cap that slowly compressed the skull until thoughts leaked out like juice from a pressed orange. But that was child's play compared to what happens when she places her lips on your forehead and whispers, "You're such a good man." Good man. Two words that sound like praise but land like a diagnosis. You've been categorized, filed away in the drawer marked safe, right between reliable Toyota Camry and sensible shoes. The forehead kiss is the participation trophy of intimacy. You showed up, you tried. Here's your consolation prize. But let me tell you about forgetting, real forgetting, the kind that doesn't happen all at once but seeps in like water damage, invisible until the ceiling collapses. There was a philosopher, no, that's too grand a word. There was a drunk I met in Prague who told me something I've never forgotten. He said, "Every man has three names, the one his parents gave him, the one he gives himself, and the one he accepts from a woman's mouth." He laughed, spraying Pilsner across the bar, then added, "The third one always wins." You had dreams once. Specific, ridiculous, beautiful dreams. Maybe you wanted to write novels about cosmonauts falling in love with black holes. Maybe you wanted to build furniture with your hands, feeling wood grain beneath your fingers like reading Braille messages from trees. Maybe you just wanted to spend 6 months in Mongolia, learning to throat sing with nomads who've never heard of LinkedIn. But then she kissed your forehead one evening and said, "You'd be perfect in marketing." And slowly, incrementally, with the patience of erosion, you forgot who you were before she named you. Your bookshelf, once chaotic with possibility, now holds self-help books about optimizing your professional presence. Your guitar gathers dust in the closet. When did you stop playing? You can't remember. It wasn't a decision. It was a forgetting, as natural and unnoticed as losing baby teeth. The neuroscientists at Tokyo University published something fascinating in 2024. They found that people in long-term relationships can literally reshape their autobiographical memories to match their partner's version of events. Your brain, that traitor, rewrites your history to keep the peace. You don't just forget who you were. You remember being someone you never were. Nietzsche called this ressentiment, the re-feeling of events through another's emotional lens until your own emotions become foreign to you. But even he didn't anticipate how willing we'd become in our own erasure, how we'd kiss the hand that holds the eraser. Here's a game, if you dare play it. Try to remember the last opinion you held that she didn't influence. Not the big things. Everyone expects compromise on the big things. I mean the small ones. Your favorite coffee shop, the way you fold your shirts, whether you sleep with the window open. When did her preferences become your defaults? There's a man reading this right now, maybe it's you, who used to wake up at 5 a.m. to watch the sunrise. Not because it was productive or Instagram-worthy, but because the world felt honest at that hour. Now he sleeps until 7:23 because she needs her cuddle time. And he's forgotten that he once had a standing appointment with the dawn. The forehead kiss is a baptism in reverse. Instead of being named, you're unnamed. Instead of being blessed into identity, you're blessed into amnesia. And the cruelest part? It feels like love. It feels like being cared for, being seen, being valued. But what's being valued isn't you. It's the shadow puppet you've become, dancing to choreography you didn't write. So let me ask you this, and feel free to let the question burn. If she left tomorrow, taking with her all the names she's given you, all the roles she's assigned, all the futures she's planned, who would be left standing in your skin? A stranger, probably. A stranger you once knew intimately, but forgot how to recognize. A stranger who's been waiting patiently for you to remember his name. Every sweet nothing whispered becomes a chain of something heavy. Listen. Do you hear that? That's the sound of 10,000 men leaning into phones at midnight, straining to decode the meaning behind her K. Just the letter K. Not okay. Not okay, certainly not. I understand and appreciate your message. Just K, an alphabetical bullet to the temple of communication. But the ear is where we build our prisons from promises. She whispers something at 2 a.m., wine-drunk and soft, her breath like warm ghosts against your skin. I've never felt this way before. And you, fool that you are, you archive that whisper. You play it on repeat in the museum of your mind, even as her actions scream a different story in daylight. The Buddhists have a concept, shunyata, the essential emptiness of all things. But they never met a man in love, because he fills that emptiness with her every word, until he's drowning in an ocean of syllables that mean nothing and everything simultaneously. Let me paint you a picture. It's 1934 in Paris. A young artist named Francois falls in love with a cabaret singer who whispers French poetry in his ear between sets. Mon âme est à toi. My soul is yours. Beautiful, no? Except she whispers the same words to the banker in box 3, the diplomat in the balcony, and the married industrialist who pays her rent. Francois finds out, naturally. But here's the grotesque punchline. He keeps going to her shows. He sits in the same seat, orders the same whiskey, and listens to her sing the same songs, because even her lies sound like truth in the key of C minor. That's what the ear does. It transforms sound waves into meaning, whether that meaning exists or not. We're all Francois, sitting in our designated seats, paying admission to hear promises that were never meant for keeping. A Harvard study from 2025, fresh off the academic presses, found that men retain emotional auditory memories 40% longer than women. We're literally built to be haunted by what we hear. Every I love you becomes a life sentence. Every we'll see becomes a prophecy we spend years trying to decode. But here's where it gets interesting. Where Kierkegaard's concept of repetition meets modern masculine madness. We don't just remember what she said, we remember what we wanted her to mean. The ear isn't a recording device. It's a fiction writer, constantly revising dialogue to match our desperate plot. She says, "You're so funny," and you hear, "I'm falling for you." And she says, "Maybe sometime," and you hear, "Definitely. Just be patient." She says nothing, and you hear an invitation to try harder. I knew a man, brilliant programmer, spoke 4 languages, could solve Rubik's cubes blindfolded, who spent 3 years analyzing his ex's voicemails. He had them all saved, 247 messages, organized by date, duration, and what he called emotional density. And he'd created an algorithm to detect micro-patterns in her tone, convinced that somewhere in those sound waves was the answer to why she left. You want to know what he found? Nothing. Patterns in chaos, meaning in white noise. Love in the static between words. The ear of echoes doesn't seek truth. It seeks confirmation that our suffering has meaning. The ancient Greeks had a myth about echo. The nymph cursed to only repeat others' words, but they got it backward. We're echo, cursed to repeat her words endlessly in our minds, long after she's stopped speaking, long after she's left the cave of our affection. Here's my question for you, whispered directly into your ear of echoes. Can you tell the difference anymore between what she actually said and what you've been telling yourself she meant? The liberation isn't in finally hearing her clearly. It's in recognizing that you've been having a conversation with yourself all along, using her voice as a ventriloquist dummy for your own hopes and fears. The moment you stop listening for hidden meanings is the moment you start hearing the actual sound of your life, quieter than you expected, but finally, mercifully, real. The space between your fingers was never meant for hers. It was meant for your own becoming. Here we are, at the end that isn't an ending, because endings are for stories. And what we're discussing is the absence of story, the beautiful, terrifying void where plot goes to die and life begins. Watch a man reach for his phone at 3 a.m., muscle memory guiding his thumb to her contact. His hand hovers there, a sculptor considering clay, a pianist above keys that play only minor chords. But tonight, something different happens. Tonight, he doesn't press call. He holds nothing instead, and in that nothing finds everything. The Japanese have a word, ma, for the negative space that gives meaning to positive form, the pause between notes that makes music, the emptiness in a bowl that makes it useful. But we Western fools, we fear the empty hand like death itself. We must be holding something, her hand, our phone, a drink, a cigarette, the steering wheel driving toward her apartment at midnight, despite all better judgment. Let me tell you about hands, about what they were before she taught them to beg. Your hands once built things, terrible things maybe, lopsided birdhouses, overcooked omelets, poetry that didn't quite rhyme, but they were yours. Your hands knew the weight of your own life. Then you met her, and suddenly your hands existed only in relation to her skin. They learned to trace her collarbone like practicing penmanship, writing love letters in a language that was never yours. Schopenhauer wrote that we can do what we will, but we cannot will what we will. Your hands prove him right every time they reach for your phone to text her, even as your mind screams, stop. They've developed their own intelligence, these hands, a muscle memory of need that bypasses your brain entirely. There's a monastery in Tibet where monks practice holding water. Not cups of water, just water cupped in their palms, letting it slowly leak through their fingers. They do this for hours, days, years, until they understand that holding and losing are the same action. That everything we grasp is already gone. But you're not a monk, are you? You're a man whose hands shake when her name appears on your screen, whose fingers have typed and deleted 10,000 messages, each one a small death of dignity, whose palms still remember the exact temperature of her skin from that Tuesday in September when she let you hold her hand for exactly 17 minutes before pulling away to check her phone. A 2024 study from the Karolinska Institute found that men who practice conscious solitude, not loneliness, but chosen aloneness, show increased gray matter in the regions associated with self-identity and emotional regulation. In other words, empty hands build stronger selves. But try explaining that to your hands at midnight when they're reaching for her ghost. Here's what Machiavelli knew but never explicitly stated. Power isn't in what you hold, but in what you're willing to release. The prince who clutches his kingdom too tightly rules nothing but his own fear. The lover who grasps at affection holds only air flavored with desperation. I'll tell you something strange, something that sounds like surrender, but tastes like victory. The day you stop reaching for her is the day you start reaching for yourself. And what you find there, in the cathedral of your own palms, in the church of your empty hands, is not loneliness, but company. Your own company, patient and permanent, waiting like a loyal dog you forgot you owned. Your hands were never meant to be begging bowls for her attention. They were meant to be creators, destroyers, builders of your own strange paradise. They were meant to write your own name in the sand, even knowing the waves will wash it away. They were meant to applaud your own small victories, to wipe your own tears without shame, to build a life that doesn't require her presence to validate its existence. So here's my final question, posed to the hands that hold this phone, this tablet, this glowing screen of possibility. What would you build if you stopped reaching for her and started reaching for the tools of your own becoming? The answer isn't in your head, it's in your hands. It always has been. Empty them. Free them. Let them remember what they were before they learned to beg. And then, in that terrifying freedom, in that gorgeous void, begin.